I just received an email. The investor said, I'm a father of two girls. I run my own business and I'm feeling overwhelmed and confused. And I would really appreciate if you could tell me which strategy I should get. Well, if it sounds familiar, if you're feeling that all strategies sounds the same and you don't know in which one you should go, well, this show is for you. Fellow investors, bonjour. This is Mike Leroux, founder of Dividend Stocks Rocks and passionate investor. You're listening to the Dividend Guy blog podcast where I and my co-host Véronique will help you invest with more conviction so you can enjoy your retirement. Dividend growth investors, bonjour. Mike Leroux here. You're listening to the Dividend Guy podcast. I hope you are doing well. I am on fire today because I have a completely new setup with a camera and like a boom arm for my mic. So I don't know where we're gonna go with this show, but it's going to be a lot of fun. How are you doing, Vero?
I'm doing good, Mike, and I appreciate like all your lightning and all that. So, guys, if you want to see like the improvements, you may want to have a look at our YouTube channel, so Dividend Guy on YouTube. But let's keep you here for a while because today we continue a discussion that started in the episode about me and my investment story. And at one point, we touched on adapting my strategy to my busy schedule. And I'm probably not the only one busy around here. So let's give it more thought and come up with a plan for busy investors.
Yeah, the more you read about finding the best strategy for you, the more you get conflicting information. And in the end, you're going to feel overwhelmed, confused, and probably frustrated because on one side, you're going to see an investor that makes a lot of sense saying, "Oh, you should invest in gold and this and that." And then 2 minutes later, you have somebody else telling you that it's all about dividend growth stocks. And another one will tell you, no, it's all about ETF. So, how can you mix all of this considering your schedule, your knowledge, and your time? This is what we're going to talk about today.
And by the way, if you'd like to listen to the episode about me, visit thedividendguyblog.com/193 and make sure to subscribe to the show now so you won't miss any episode. Mike, just like your introduction, we had some friends over the weekend, and the man is a busy entrepreneur who manages like a multi-million-dollar business. The woman is a nurse who sometimes works during weekends. They have two children, one of which is into competitive hockey. So like you've said, pretty busy people. And so we discussed my job, and my friend asked, "All right, so when should I transfer my money from the bank and manage it with a dividend stocks rock approach?" And as the marketing girl, I could have said, "Well, anytime, But I explained that it depends on his time, knowledge, and interest. How are these three spheres interconnected?
Yeah, it's actually not always the good decision. First, you need time. If you want to manage your portfolio, you need to be able to sit down and start looking at your portfolio, looking at your results. And if you have stocks in your portfolio, well, of course, you need to dig a little bit deeper. Just watching some YouTube videos or reading a newsletter is not enough for you to understand what really happens and to see like what's going on with like the payout ratios, the revenue trend, the earnings per share, and so on. So you need that time on end. Then you also need the knowledge because you may go through a quarterly review and have no clue what you're reading about. If stuff like comparable sales or same store sales and then payout ratios and operating margin are all terms that sounds like you're reading Chinese, maybe you lack a little bit of financial knowledge. And then managing your portfolio by yourself could be more dangerous than anything else. And
Mhm.
if you have the time and knowledge, maybe you just don't have the interest, or vice versa. If you have a lot of interest about finance, well, you're going to make time and you're going to learn to
Mhm.
manage your portfolio. But definitely, I mean, I always take my wife's example as an example where she understands when I tell her about the finance and our portfolio, but she really doesn't care at all. So she's just like, yeah, okay, so we talked about it for 5 minutes. Now we can move on to another topic because that's really not in my interest. So she has the time and she has the like basic knowledge to understand what I'm saying, but clearly she will never manage her portfolio. So if I stop managing it, we'll have to change the strategy for sure.
All right, so how should someone with no time, no knowledge, and no interest invest? What should their asset allocation look like?
Well, across all podcasts, across social media, and YouTube's and all the shows that you can listen or watch, most people will tell you that financial advisors are the roots of all evil. They are completely useless. They charge a bunch of fees, and you could do it on your own. Well, if you have no time, no knowledge, and no interest, your best bet is to find a good financial advisor that will
Right.
professionally manage your portfolio. Uh, as an example, when I was a financial planner, of course, I was doing a lot more than just managing my client's portfolio, and that's like the number one key here is a good financial advisor will do a lot more than just having a yearly review to watch over your portfolio. But
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I justified the most my fees on was the fact that I literally explain and convince most of my clients to not sell when the market was down 30, 40, 50% during the financial crisis. A lot of them, they were ready to just pack their bags and move on to the like to a cabin and forget about the entire investment world, thinking that the apocalypse would be there and all banks are going to go bankrupt. So at that time, a financial advisor that calm you down and explains you what's going on, man, that is worth a lot of money. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I love my Jeep Wrangler, right? I just love driving it during summertime. I take off the roof and the doors and we go for rides. I love it. But it's been 2 days. It's actually at the garage right now because there were like some lights in the dashboards flashing and some repairs. And you know what? If I open the hood and I start working on it, I'm just going to make more damage than anything else because I have no time, no knowledge, and certainly no interest in mechanic. So I might as well bring it to a mechanic, trying to trust him and just pay the bill. And that's going to be fine because at least I know that once I get my Jeep back, it's going to drive smoothly. So same thing, no time, no knowledge, no interest, go with a financial advisor. And one tip I can give you if you want to know if you have a good financial advisor or not, on top of like he should have a plan for you and he should do a lot more than just managing your portfolio. Ask him questions and ask him like other options to so he can compare more than one solutions for you. If he's able to
Mm-hmm.
do that, highlighting the pros and cons of each solutions, then you have a good financial advisor and not a car salesman that just want to push some of the most highest fees mutual funds there are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but while that approach with a financial advisor is totally fine, your asset allocation greatly impacts your results. And I'm obviously thinking about mutual funds here. So please give us more details on that.
Yeah, often we hear people that have like advisors, they look at their past 5 or 10 years and they're going to say, oh, my investment return sucks with my advisor. And then for some reason, well, I kind of like know why, but a lot of people these days just compare their returns with the S&P 500.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes sense, right? Because over the past 5, 10 years, the S&P 500 did so well that everybody wants to match those returns. And they forget that sometimes it looks a little bit more like 2008, where the S&P 500 was down about 50%. But then nobody wanted to compare against this benchmark. So I've like knowing how you are invested is super important. I had a DSR member asking me about the Ray Dalio all weather portfolio, and asking me like what are my thoughts about this type of portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And the all weather portfolio, I mean, the main goal is to protect your investment regardless of what's happening, regardless if we are in a recession or any other economic crisis that could hit your nest egg. So you have
Hmm.
30% in stocks, 40% in long-term bonds, 15% in intermediate term bonds, then you have some gold and commodities. So well spread across a lot of different types of investment. But of course, the goal of that portfolio is not to outperform the S&P 500 when the S&P 500 is in the middle of a bull market driven by the Magnificent Seven and the rise of artificial intelligence, right?
Right.
The goal here is to protect from volatility. So definitely if you have this kind of portfolio, it's not a matter of like, is it working or not, or if it's a good strategy or not, but rather what do you want in your portfolio? So if you want to protect your portfolio against economic crisis, well, definitely this type of portfolio is going to do a lot better than mine that is 100% invested in stocks. So volatility is definitely a big factor when you consider your return. You have like, of course, the good old classic stocks versus bonds, but even if you just manage a portfolio of stocks like I do, well, small caps versus large cap will bring a whole new level of volatility. So
Hmm.
sometimes you're going to look at a company having a market cap of like 500 million or a billion or two. And then you look at the revenue growth, it's great, the earnings as well, it's a dividend grower, everything is fine. Yes, but for those smaller companies, chances are that if they hit a road bump or if a major institutional investor decides that it's no part of its portfolio anymore, the stock price is going to go down by 20% in a heartbeat. So,
Right.
knowing that a small cap is more vulnerable to economic changes, to the stock market, or any decision of a large institutional investor, well, then you know in which kind of boat you are getting your feet in. And again, if you're looking at sectors, you have also the same thought. So sometimes if you invest in companies in consumer staples, in utilities and REITs and communication and healthcare, they may be a little bit more stable. But if you're looking at consumer discretionary, energy, materials, tech stocks, they're going to be more cyclical. And yes, they will bring a little bit more returns from time to time,
Hmm.
but they could also drop very quickly. Now these days, everybody says that tech is is always like the best sector, but in 22, when most of the big guys were down 25-30%, it was a little bit tougher for someone who was greatly exposed to that sector. So your risk tolerance is a key factor in your asset allocation and how you intend to manage your portfolio moving forward.
Now, if you listen to this show, you have a minimum interest, that's for sure, and probably a little knowledge. So this means you're mostly ready to put in a little time. So which options does it bring to investors that fit this description?
So yeah, so if you have like a level of like medium interest, medium knowledge, medium time, so a little bit in between, probably that the bare minimum would be to go with a robo advisor. The fees are higher, but it's professionally managed. You don't have to put too much time on it because once you have completed the investor profile, you basically just jump on the robo advisor with the asset allocation that you want, and then you're set. So with a minimum of knowledge and a minimum of interest, you can follow the economy and learn a little bit more about why the robo advisor is built that way. If you want to go one more step, then comes just the ETFs. Because in the end, the robo
Hmm.
advisor is literally just a package ETF that is automatically rebalance every month or quarter or
Hmm.
6 months. Well, you can do that on your own by doing a little bit more research. So again, a little bit more time, a little bit more knowledge, and a little bit more interest, and then you can either invest in a all-in-one ETF, so an ETF that is already packaged for you according to your investment profile. So very, very similar to a robo advisor. The only difference is you're going to end up paying maybe like 0.20% fees instead of like 0.5 to 1%, because sometimes a robo advisor could be quite expensive. You of course always have a little bit more support. So if you're not sure about like why and how the portfolio is built, going for the robo advisor is probably a better option. But as you gain more knowledge, building your own portfolio with ETFs could be a great place to start.
Let's take a quick pause to invite listeners to download the DSR Recession Proof Portfolio Workbook. This guide will empower you as an investor so you can stop doubting your decision and invest with more conviction. What type of tools will they get, Mike?
Well, actually, I created this workbook in 2020 during the pandemic crash to help my members to cut the noise and invest with more conviction. It was a tough period and a lot of investors had a lot of questions. It's a workbook, not a book. It means that there's plenty of questions over there to help you evolve as an investor. And every year I'm upgrading it, adding pages, adding content, and make it more complete. So when you know the answer, you don't stress about the question. And this is how you can invest with more conviction.
The DSR Recession Proof Portfolio Workbook is totally free. Visit thedividendguyblog.com/workbook and download it now. If you already used it, hit the comments and let us know how did it help you. Again, thedividendguyblog.com/workbook. But then, Mike, as it was the case for me, sometimes we might not feel comfortable with ETFs or like those kind of package. And so we want to manage a portfolio including individual stocks. But we must set some limits to maintain a healthy portfolio without turning it into a full-time job, right? So, for example, I've decided to hold at most 20, 25 stocks to save time on quarterly reviews. So, in other words, the clearer your focus is, the less time it will require to invest in line with it, right?
Yeah. So just to be clear on one thing, some people will stay at the ETF level for the rest of their life. They will retire
Mm-hmm.
on ETF, and that's going to work well. But we both agree on that. I just love to have control and understanding because when an ETF is down, I mean, I recently did a review of XCQT, which is a very popular ETF. Do you know how many stocks this ETF has?
No.
9,000.
No.
So trying to find out what really happened in a
It's
quarter or in a
impossible.
year, yeah, I mean, you're never going to find out what really happened. It's just you invest in the stock market, you like trust managers, and that's the end of it. You should not dig deeper because then it's going to be more than a full-time job. It's going to be like a burnout that's just going to wait for you. So, having that level of interest, knowledge, and time to manage your own portfolio is very exciting. But then you need to have kind of a limit, like as you said. Um, in my opinion, to get a good diversification, you should have between 20 to 40 stocks. So, under 20 stocks, the problem that you will have is the high concentration. In other words, you have little room to make mistakes or absolutely
Mhm.
none. Because if you're making like 3 mistakes out of 12 stocks, you're not going to have a good year. And it could
Been
literally
there, done
cripple. Yeah.
that.
And it could cripple your retirement portfolio if you invest with a large amount. On the other side, if you go above 40 stocks, you're going to get closer and closer to get a full time job. A lot of investors will make the mistakes of having like 75 companies, but not taking the time to review them, thinking,
Mhm.
oh, I'm super well diversified, which is true. If you're doing your job correctly, you can avoid duplicate and have like built your own ETF. But the problem I see there is most of the time you're not going to spend all your weekend to follow each quarterly earnings. And at 75 stocks, if you don't do that, of course, you're going to have like plenty of companies that you're never going to know what's going to happen with them. And then later on, and we have extensively covered BCE this year, but
Right.
the BCE of 2015 and the BCE of 2024 is a completely different business. So if you bought it 10 years ago and everything was fine, well, maybe you're up for a good checkpoint because there are a few factors you want to review before you make a decision, right? So
Mhm.
on my end, I have about 30, 35 stocks, mostly I added a few more positions, mostly because I spend my entire day watching the market, doing the research. So it's kind of like my full time job on top of like having a full time job, because it's literally like the same thing. If I had like a job that is not related to investment, I would probably try to keep it around 25 positions for that reason. It takes more time to look at each of your position when you're about to invest, but once you do that proper due diligence, that you read annual reports, you went through um, some graph, analyze some metrics. After that, it's more like just spending maybe like 2 hours every quarter, just looking at your portfolio as a whole. There are a lot of companies that will not require you to follow every
Hmm.
quarter. I'm thinking of like a company like Fortis. If you're just like a quick look on, oh, okay, is this business is growing low single, mid single digit? If yes, there's no big news around it, you can easily just read the press release within 2 minutes and just move on to the next stop, to the next stock. So it's not necessarily spending like 1 or 2 hours per companies, but rather just identify maybe the two or three companies that had a rough quarter, and then you want to do a deeper dive into those. So it's really a balance. But if you have like 75 stocks, of course you're gonna just let a bunch of them like on the table, and you're just gonna ignore and literally hope that they will do well in the future. And hoping is definitely not a good investing strategy.
Hmm. All right. So, could you give examples of two or three scenarios that make sense for busy people?
Yeah. So if you're busy, I don't think it's worth it to invest in stocks. I would really go for a broad ETF or all in one ETF, such as XCQT or VGROW, for example. And then BlackRock, Vanguard, they all have like all in one ETF, from very safe, so very focused to bonds, to very aggressive, such as XCQT, that is 100% invested in stocks. So that could be very easy. You do the research just to know which kind of volatility you want in your portfolio from one year to another. And really, the question is, how do I feel on a bad year? Because like thinking about double digit returns will make you smile. It's going to make like everybody's going to smile. It's just easy. So I found that investors in general are very courageous on bear on during bull market, and very concerned and afraid during bear markets. So think about the maximum you can get as the low point in your portfolio, and then you can go for those all-in-one ETF. The other scenario that could be interesting is to focus on a specific strategy. There are factor ETFs, and there are also dividend grower focus ETFs, such as SCHD on the US side, or VIG as well, the Vanguard dividend investing ETF. You also have the same thing on the Canadian market with XDV or ZDZ. So those are like example of like dividend growth focus ETF that you can add in your portfolio. Or the other solution that I've seen a lot is to have a core ETF portfolio where you're adding a few stocks on the side. So most of your portfolio doesn't require you any time, any maintenance, but then you add a few stocks that are kind of like your favorite companies to follow. Just be
Hmm.
careful not to have a Canadian ETF and then adding ETF like Canadian stocks on the side on top of it, because the Canadian market is like so small and so restrained in terms of like possibilities, that chances are, if you look at the top 10 holdings of your Canadian ETF, you'll have more than half of those in your basket of stocks that you have created yourself. So in the end, just select either I go for Canadian stocks or I go for one Canadian ETF. But I could see that you have Canadian stocks on the side, and then on the to have US exposure, you can then select either a dividend growth ETF or simply a classic Nasdaq or S&P
Hmm.
500 ETF that will do the job. So you don't have to follow 100 companies.
Mike, I realized that the time we put into investing also impacts our learning curve. So, for instance, you took 3 months to invest your 108,000 pension plan from your previous job in dividend growth stocks, while it took me almost 3 years to build it to where I wanted it to be. So therefore, your learning curve is much faster than mine, and this will also show in total returns, right?
Yeah, well, we didn't start at the same place either, right?
No,
So
in
I
terms
was
of knowledge,
already
not at
in
all.
terms of, yeah, and probably in terms of interest as well, because I
Sure.
remember that when we first discussed you starting working well, actually, when you started working for us, we didn't even have dividend stocks rock, so it
Hmm.
was definitely more a marketing job, a communication job, which is definitely your background. And then when we make the entire switch towards dividend growth investing, that was kind of like a steep learning curve for anyone who would have not had an investment background. But
Hmm.
still, I started investing in 2003 and I'm still learning 21 years later. There's always something you're going to learn because the economics are going to change, the companies are going to change. I mean, when I started investing in 2003, we were not talking about a high inflation rate. We were not talking about
Hmm.
the rise of artificial intelligence. I mean, there are like a lot of things that were completely different 20 years ago than they are today. And this is very interesting to see how companies will manage their way or fail to manage their way throughout those challenges and economic environment changes. So as you invest, you will learn a lot more, and then it's just going to be, I guess, more exciting, but you're also going to have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes, and the mistakes I did 10 years ago, I'm not making them anymore today. But we
Hopefully.
have, hopefully, yeah, definitely. But still, I made my fair share of mistakes in 2022. So it's like just another set of mistakes, another set of lessons that I was
Hmm.
able to learn at that time that we have covered in previous episode. But yeah, so it's the more you spend time investing, it's like any other skills, you're going to get better, and hopefully your investment returns are also going to be better.
Okay, but that does not mean a slower learning curve or returns are not worth it. Like over 20, 30, 50 years, the results should still be better than a 100% couch potato investment style, right?
I would say that it really depends on each investor. One thing that I've realized over time is several strategies will work, which the thing that doesn't work is if you start with a coach potato investment style for 5 years, and then you jump into dividend growth investing for another 5 years, and then you go to momentum investing or factor investing, or you're just like switching strategies every 2, 3, 5 years because somebody else did better than you over that same period of time, then you're going to
Hmm.
fail. You're going to fail because you're not able to stick to a valid strategy. So, for someone who doesn't have a clear investment process and just jump from one stock to another because they just listen to podcasts or YouTubes, or they're like subscribed to an investment newsletter and they're just like shifting subscriptions every 5 or 10 years, well, then probably that just buying an all-in-one ETF for like 25 years will do a lot better because you don't touch anything. And usually it's probably there's a saying where like your portfolio is like soap. So the more you play with it, the more it shrinks. So maybe sometimes it's just to you let it there and you don't put too much water on it, and it's going to be just fine. In the end, the key here is to have a high level of conviction, and that usually comes with a high level of understanding. So if you understand what you do, you will have more trust in your process and in your strategy. And for me, that also means a higher level of control. So I would not feel
Hmm.
comfortable leaving my money into a mutual funds, but same thing for an ETF. The lack of control will affect my understanding of what's going on and will affect ultimately my conviction. So when I look at those companies, I have plenty control of deciding if I want to add more, if I want to reduce my position or just get rid of it. And I just love that. Now I determine clear investing rules that I never discard, and that's the whole point. And sometimes I've said that multiple times, but we had an episode on the beat the TSX, for example, or the dogs of the
Hmm.
Dow. Well, if you're doing the dogs of the Dow, there are like very clear rules to follow, and if you just do most of them, but you combined it with like some ETF and some other stocks, you're not doing the dogs of the Dow. You're doing something else. You're not doing the
Right.
TSX, or same thing with the all weather portfolio. If you have the all weather portfolio, but then you had some ETF and some stocks on the sides, well, you're not doing the all weather portfolio. You're just like shifting strategies as the wind goes, and this could be damaging for your portfolio, even if you spend time, even if you have more knowledge, and even if you learn more about investing. If you keep on messing up with your strategy and not having clear rules, this is what will hurt your investment the most.
And as we age, we might find ourselves with more time. This can lead some investors to enter more complicated strategies like covered calls or preferred shares and etc. because there are plenty of them. Do you think it's a good idea or should we keep it simple?
I'm not here to say it doesn't work, but I'm here to say I like simple things. And I like to keep it simple because it's easy to understand, it's easy to follow, and it works.
Mm,
However, I know a lot of investors are writing covered calls on their stocks, and there's an aspect of it on top of like the fact that it's working for them. It's they really like doing this, and sometimes the same way I argue with people that I'm literally retired right now, and they say, no, you're working like 10 hours a day. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing something that I really enjoy. So is it really working? I would do it
mm.
if I did not receive a paycheck from it. So if you're retired and you just love to open your brokerage account and then start looking at option prices and buy some or sell some and then get into more complex strategies, but you just love doing it, well, it's actually a good thing for you because you're gonna keep up with your brain. It's like going to the gym, but for your brain, and it's just a
Mhm.
good thing. So maybe it's gonna work out for you, but just don't think that you must go there. If you're happy with a simple strategy, it's probably a good thing that you don't do anything else.
So then how can people use the extra time in their portfolio without taking too much risk or going from a strategy to another?
See, it's kind of ironic because I'm having a lot more times lately since school restarted in September and my children are older. I just have like one that requires me to drive, so I'm no more a Uber guy. I can actually have more time to spend at home. And one thing I do with my extra time is not to add more positions to my portfolio or not like change anything or get more complex, but rather it gives me more time to dig deeper to answer questions. I
Mm.
told you like a few months ago, I did a deeper dive into BCE exactly for that. I thought, oh, I can actually afford to spend 5 hours of my day just going through financial statements and figure out what's going on with the numbers. While if I don't have that much time, I will not do this and I will probably just avoid the stock altogether. But then it gives you a little bit more time to get those answers. So do not just add more to your strategy, but just spend a little bit more time understanding what's going on. And maybe you're going to discover some hidden gems or you're going to discover some major flaw in your portfolio that you would not have figured out before.
Hey, dividend growth investors, this is Vero. Mike is currently taking a sip of water, which gives us 10 seconds, and I literally mean 10 seconds to grow the podcast together. Go on Spotify or Apple Podcast, hit pause, and then under our logo, you'll see two very interesting buttons. One to subscribe, hit that subscribe button now, and then give us a 5-star rating. Our goal is to help more investors just like you, so please spread the love. Thank you. So let's end with this, Mike. What is the best way to gain more time, knowledge, and interest, even for busy people?
Well, I think it's always starts with the interest. I mean, if you don't have any interest in investing, that's totally fine. You know that you have to invest, but you don't care about it. Then you go with an advisor or you go with an ETF, and that is perfect. Then as you gain more interest, well, you will make time. And one thing that I love to do is to always set everything in my life according to the Pareto principles. So
Mm,
focusing on the 20% of work, of effort, that will generate 80% of the result. The dividend triangle is a good example of the Pareto principles where that 20% of time or 20% of focus that I use, well, if I find a company with strong revenue growth, strong earning per share growth, and strong dividend growth, well, of course, chances are that 80%
mm,
of the time it's going to be a great company for my portfolio. So focusing on this will also help you to get your attention to learn the important stuff and not necessarily just to add more metrics to follow and more concept to apply, but rather just keep everything simple and be very good at what you do and be okay by ignoring the rest. Because a lot of times investors are just like, yeah, what do you think about this strategy? Or what do you think about this company that is not a dividend grower? And I'm like, I'm not going to spend time about this because I already find a strategy that works for me. So,
mm.
what's the point of trying to change it? I like it. I have a high level of conviction. I'm able to stick to that strategy for now more than a decade. Well, then what's the point of trying to see if there's something else that would work better elsewhere? If it works right now, like I can stick to it, I know I will be able to retire on that strategy. And this is the most important point. Because trying to find the best strategy will never happen. Every single 5 years or 10 years period, you're going to look back and find out what worked best. And for the next 10 years forward, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing. So just go with something you understand and that you're comfortable with for the rest of your life. It's going to be a lot easier and you're going to save a lot of time.
All right, so thank you, Mike, for offering a solution to all the busy people who still want to improve their financial situation. Listeners, to give you a head start on the strategy that best suits your needs, download your free DSR portfolio workbook at thedividendguyblog.com/workbook. For the show notes and related content, visit thedividendguyblog.com/199. If you like what we do, show us some love, hit the subscribe button now, and leave us a 5-star rating. Until next week, stay
Stay
invested.
invested. Hey, fellow investors, it's Mike here. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Please note that the Dividend Guy Blog podcast is at no time issuing buy or sell recommendation. Please do your own due diligence as this podcast is recorded for information and hopefully fun purposes only. Make your research, make sure you do your stuff. We're not responsible for your losses or your profit after listening to this episode. And until next one, stay invested.